I promised Diane I would never open the sealed room above our garage. For 37 years, I kept that promise. 3 days after her funeral, I broke it. What I found inside changed everything. A journal, photographs of a daughter I never knew existed, and one sentence that made my blood run cold. Derek has known for 5 years. He will try to stop you. My own son had been hiding the truth, and his plan to destroy us had already begun. Hello, everyone. And thank you for being here with me today. Before we continue, take a moment to comment below and let me know where you are watching from. I truly love seeing how far this story reaches. And just a quick note before we go on. This story includes some fictional elements added for storytelling and educational purposes. Any similarity to real people, names, or places is purely coincidental. But the message behind it is meant to be meaningful. I never thought the hardest part of losing Diane would be what came after. I thought burying her would break me. I was wrong. It was the silence that nearly did it. The silence of the house. The silence of a life lived for 37 years with someone who is suddenly not there anymore. The church was small. White walls, wooden pews, tall windows that let in the gray November light. Traverse City had been our home for decades, and it felt like the whole town showed up that morning. I stood at the front, staring at the casket. White lilies draped across the top. Diane always loved lilies. She grew them every spring in the garden behind our house, the one that overlooked the lake. Now they were resting on top of her, beautiful and useless. Pastor Mitchell said kind things. He talked about heaven and peace and how Diane was watching over us. I nodded at the right times. I shook hands when hands were offered, but I was not really there. My mind kept drifting back to the house, to the garage, to the ceiling I had walked under 10,000 times, without ever asking why. I looked around the room, neighbors I had known for years. Bill Henderson from next door, Martha Crane from the grocery store, faces full of sympathy and sorrow. And then I saw him, Derek. My son walked in 15 minutes late. His suit was expensive. His shoes were polished. His face was a mask. No tears. No red eyes. No sign that the woman in that casket had raised him, fed him, loved him for 36 years. He sat in the back row. He did not come up to me. He did not put his hand on my shoulder. He just sat there, checking his phone, glancing at the door like he had somewhere else to be. I felt something heavy settle in my chest, something I did not want to name. After the service, people lined up to offer their condolences. They told me Diane was a wonderful woman. They told me she was at peace now. I thanked them. I said all the things a grieving husband is supposed to say. But inside I felt nothing. Just hollow, just empty. Derek finally approached as the church was clearing out. He did not hug me. He did not ask how I was holding up. He looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, we need to talk about the house." I stared at him. "The house?" "The lake house," he said, like it was obvious. "It is worth $2.3 million. You cannot live there alone. We should list it while the market is still good." I could not believe what I was hearing. His mother was not even cold in the ground, and he was talking about real estate, about money, about selling the home Diane and I had built together over 37 years. "Not today, Derek," I said quietly. He frowned. "Dad, I am trying to help. You are 66 years old. That house is too big for one person. We need to be practical. Not today." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head, turned around, and walked out of the church without another word. No goodbye. No hug. No. "I love you, Dad." Just the sound of his expensive shoes clicking against the floor and the door closing behind him. I stood there alone in the empty church. The lilies on Diane's casket were already starting to wilt, and I realized something that made my chest ache in a way I had never felt before. I had not just lost my wife. I had lost my son a long time ago. I just had not wanted to see it. By the time I got home, The sun was setting behind the lake. The sky was painted orange and purple. The kind of sunset Diane used to sit on the porch and watch every evening. She would hold her coffee in both hands and just breathe. Just be still. I used to think she was watching the water. Now I wonder if she was thinking about something else entirely. Someone else. The house was dark. Cold. I walked through the kitchen without turning on the lights. Past the living room where her reading chair sat empty. Past the bedroom door I could not bring myself to open. I ended up in the garage. I do not even know why. Maybe habit. Maybe something pulling me there. I stood in the middle of the concrete floor and looked up. The ceiling above me was low, finished with drywall that Diane had insisted on years ago. She told me it was insulation. She told me the space above was unsafe, full of old wiring and dust. She told me there was nothing worth seeing up there. And then she had taken my hand, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "Promise me, Frank. Promise me you will never touch that wall, no matter what happens. Promise me." I was 29 years old then, newly married, madly in love. I would have promised her anything. So I did. I promised her I would never open it. I promised her I would never ask why. And for 37 years, I kept that promise. I never questioned it. I never pushed. I trusted her, but now she was gone. And standing there in that dark garage, looking up at the ceiling that had been sealed for nearly 4 decades, I felt something I had never felt before. A pull, a whisper, a feeling that whatever was up there had been waiting for me, waiting for this exact moment. I closed my eyes. I could still hear her voice, clear as the day she said it. "Promise me, Frank." I whispered into the darkness. "I am sorry, Diane. I am so sorry. But I have to know." 3 days passed. 3 days of silence. 3 days of walking through rooms that still smelled like her. Lavender and vanilla. 3 days of sleeping on the couch because I could not face our bedroom. 3 days of staring at the ceiling above the garage every time I passed through. On the 4th morning, I woke before sunrise. The house was dark and still. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the first gray light spread across the lake through the window. I knew I could not keep living like this. Frozen, suspended between what was and what came next. I had to start going through her things. I had to start somewhere. I chose the bedroom. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The air inside was heavy, untouched since the morning she went to the hospital for the last time. Her robe still hung on the back of the door. Her slippers sat beside the bed, perfectly aligned, as if she might step into them any moment. I went to her dresser first. Top drawer, scarves folded neatly. A pair of reading glasses she never wore. Old birthday cards I had given her over the years. She had kept every single one. I set them aside carefully and opened the second drawer. Sweaters. A photo album I had never seen before. I made a mental note to look through it later. Then I reached for her jewelry box. It sat on top of the dresser where it had always been. Dark wood, brass hinges. I had given it to her on our 10th anniversary. She kept it locked. She always said it was just costume jewelry inside, nothing valuable. I never pressed. I lifted the lid. Her wedding ring was there. The pearl necklace I gave her on our 25th anniversary. A pair of silver earrings, and beneath them all, tucked into the velvet lining at the very bottom, something I had never seen before. A small brass key. Old and worn. The kind of key that opens something that has been closed for a very long time. My fingers closed around it. It was cold, heavier than it looked, and attached to it with a thin piece of twine was a folded slip of paper. My hands trembled as I untied it. The paper was soft from age, creased from being folded and refolded. I recognized her handwriting immediately. Neat. Deliberate. The letters leaning slightly to the right, the way they always did. 3 words. Find her. Before it is too late. I read it again. Find her. Find who? Before what is too late? I sat on the edge of the bed, the key in one hand, the note in the other. My heart was hammering. My mouth had gone dry. I looked out the window toward the garage. The answer was up there, behind that wall. I had known it for 3 days. Maybe I had known it for 37 years. I stood up. I went downstairs. I walked into the garage and grabbed the sledgehammer from the tool rack on the wall. It was heavy in my hands. I had not swung one in years. Not since I retired from construction. But my body remembered the motion, the weight, the arc. I looked up at the drywall ceiling. Diane's voice echoed in my head. "Promise me, Frank." I tightened my grip. "I promised you I would never touch this wall," I said out loud, my voice echoing in the empty garage. "But you also told me to find her." "You cannot have it both ways, Diane." I swung. The sledgehammer crashed through the drywall with a sound that shattered the silence of the house. Dust rained down. Chunks of plaster fell to the concrete floor. I swung again and again. Each impact sent vibrations up my arms, into my shoulders, through my whole body. Within minutes, I had torn open a hole large enough to see through. And there, behind the wall, was not insulation, not old wiring, not dust, and nothing. There was a door, a real wooden door, painted white, set into a frame that had been hidden behind the drywall for decades. A brass lock sat in the center of the handle. Small, old, waiting. I pulled away more of the wall until the entire door was exposed. My hands were shaking. Dust covered my arms, my face, my clothes. I did not care. I pulled the key from my pocket and held it up to the lock. It was the same size, the same age, the same brass. I slid it in. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for this moment. I turned it slowly. The lock clicked. The sound was quiet. But in that silent garage, it might as well have been thunder. I pushed the door open. The hinges groaned. A rush of stale air hit my face. Old wood, dust, something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. Sunlight filtered through a small window I never knew existed, casting a pale beam across the space. It was a room, a real room, maybe 10 feet by 12. The walls were bare wood, unfinished. A single window, small and high, looked out toward the lake, and against the far wall sat a desk. Simple, dark wood, a chair tucked neatly beneath it. On the desk sat a leather journal, thick and worn, its cover darkened from years of handling. Beside it was a small wooden box, no bigger than a shoebox, and scattered around both were papers, letters, envelopes, bank statements. I stepped inside slowly. The floorboards creaked under my weight. Nobody had walked in this room in years, maybe decades. Dust coated every surface, but the desk looked cared for, loved, even, like someone had spent 1,000 hours sitting here, writing, reading, hiding. Diane. This was her space, her secret. I sat down in the chair. It was small, built for her frame. I pulled the journal toward me and opened it to the first page. Her handwriting stared back at me, familiar, as my own face in the mirror. "Frank, if you are reading this, I am gone, and I am so sorry. I am sorry for keeping this from you. I am sorry for lying to you all these years. But I need you to know the truth. You need to know about Sophie, and you need to know that Derek has known for 5 years. He never told you. He never told me he knew. But I saw him searching through my files. I saw the look on his face. He will try to keep her away, Frank. Do not let him." I stopped breathing. My hands gripped the edges of the journal so hard my knuckles turned white. Sophie. I did not know anyone named Sophie. In 37 years of marriage, Diane had never once mentioned that name. Not once. And Derek, my son, he had known something for 5 years and said nothing. Not to me. not to his dying mother. He had kept a secret of his own. I looked out the small window. The lake stretched out below, gray and cold under the November sky, and I knew, sitting there in that hidden room with dust on my hands and my wife's confession in my lap, that everything I thought I knew about my life was about to change. Sophie. The name sat in my chest like a stone. I said it out loud in that dusty room, just to hear how it sounded. Sophie. It meant nothing to me. In 37 years, I had never heard Diane say it. Not in her sleep. Not in passing. Not once. And yet here it was, written in her handwriting, surrounded by apologies and warnings. I turned the page. And then the next. And the next. Diane's story poured out in front of me like water breaking through a dam. Page after page of neat handwriting. Sometimes steady, sometimes shaking, sometimes smudged, where tears had fallen and dried decades ago. She began at the beginning. I was 17 years old. It was the middle of January, the coldest winter Michigan had seen in 20 years. Sophie was 2 months old. She was sleeping in her crib when I smelled the smoke. I leaned closer to the page, my breath shallow. Diane had never told me about a fire. She had never told me about any of this. The fire started in the basement. Old wiring, they said later. By the time I woke up, the hallway was filled with smoke. I could not see. I could barely breathe. I grabbed Sophie from her crib and ran. I did not have shoes. I did not have a coat. I just ran with her, pressed against my chest, screaming. Both of us screaming. I made it outside. The snow burned my bare feet. Neighbors were running toward the house. Fire trucks were coming. I could hear the sirens. But then, everything went wrong. A fireman grabbed me. He said I needed medical attention. I was coughing, choking. He pulled me toward the ambulance. I tried to tell him about Sophie. I tried to hold on to her. But there were too many hands. Too many people shouting. Someone took her from my arms. They said they were taking her somewhere warm, somewhere safe. I screamed for them to give her back. I fought. But they held me down. They strapped an oxygen mask over my face. And by the time I could breathe again, by the time I could stand and walk, Sophie was gone. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the journal. I kept reading. They told me she was in protective custody. They told me it was temporary. But the next morning, a woman from the county came to the shelter where they had taken me. She was wearing a gray suit and carrying a clipboard. She sat down across from me and said, "Miss Holt, given the circumstances, we do not believe you are currently able to provide a safe and stable environment for your daughter." I was 17. I had no house, no money, no family. My parents had died in that fire. I had nothing but the clothes the Red Cross gave me and the milk stains on my shirt from feeding Sophie that morning. I told the woman I could find a job. I could find a place to live. I just needed time. She shook her head. She said Sophie needed stability. She said the foster care system would provide what I could not. I felt sick, physically sick. I set the journal down for a moment and pressed my palms against the desk. Diane. My Diane. 17 years old. Parents dead. Home burned to ashes. And the state took her baby. I picked up the journal again. I tried to fight it. I went to every office. I filled out every form. I begged every person who would listen. But I was a minor. Homeless. No resources. No lawyer. No one to speak for me. The system was bigger than me. Stronger than me. And after 3 months of fighting, they told me Sophie had been placed with a permanent foster family. They told me the case was closed. They told me to move on. I could not move on. I never moved on. But I stopped fighting where they could see me. I learned that fighting openly only made them watch me closer, only made them keep Sophie further away. So I went quiet. I got a job. I found a room to rent. I turned 18. And I started planning. The next few pages described how Diane rebuilt herself. Slowly, painfully. She worked 2 jobs. She took night classes. She moved from shelter to room to apartment, always saving, always searching. And when she was 20, she found Robert Callahan. Robert was a private investigator. Small office. 1 desk. He was young then, just starting out. But he was kind, and he did not charge me much. I told him everything. I told him about Sophie, about the fire, about the county. He said he could find her. He said he could keep track of her. Send me updates. Photographs. He said I would always know where she was, even if I could not be with her. That was 37 years ago. And for every single one of those years, Robert Callahan sent Diane a report. Every month. Sometimes every week. I turned more pages and found them. Dozens of manila envelopes, each one dated, each one containing a typed report and photographs. Sophie. Age 3. Placed with the Williams family in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Appears healthy. Attending daycare. Sophie. Age 7. Transferred to new foster family, the Hendersons. 4th placement. School records show average performance. No behavioral concerns noted. Sophie. Age 12. 6th placement. Morrison family. Appleton, Wisconsin. Seems settled. Participating in school baking club. I stopped on that one. Morrison. Sophie had ended up with a family named Morrison. The same last name as mine. As ours. A coincidence that made my skin prickle. Sophie, age 16. Still with Morrison family. Working part-time at a local bakery. Honor roll. No issues reported. Sophie, age 22. Aged out of foster care system. Working full-time at Hoffman Bakery, Milwaukee. Living in studio apartment. Alone. Alone. The word appeared again and again in the reports. Sophie, alone. Sophie, no family visits. Sophie, no emergency contacts listed. Sophie, no one. 7 foster families. 7 times she was moved, uprooted, told to start over. 7 times someone decided she was not quite worth keeping. And all that time, her mother was here. In this room, reading these reports, looking at these photographs, loving her from a distance that must have felt like dying. I turned another page and found a photograph that stopped me cold. Sophie at 30. Standing in front of a small storefront. A hand-painted sign above the door read Sophie's Sweet Corner. She was smiling. Flower on her apron. Pride in her eyes. She had built something of her own. Something no one could take from her. And she looked exactly like Diane. The same dark eyes. The same curve of her jaw. The same quiet strength in the way she held her shoulders. I stared at that photograph for a long time. 37 years I had been married to this woman. 37 years I had looked into those eyes every single day. And now I was looking at them in a stranger's face. A stranger who was not a stranger at all. I set the photograph down carefully and turned back to the journal. There were more pages. So many more pages. But my eyes caught something at the bottom of the drawer. Bank statements. Dozens of them. Neatly paper-clipped together, stretching back 10 years. Each one showing a monthly transfer from an account I did not recognize to a business account registered under the name Sophie's Sweet Corner, LLC. The transfers were labeled with one name. Anonymous Angel Investor. Anonymous Angel Investor. I stared at the words on the bank statement. Each transfer was the same amount. $500 every single month. For 10 years. $60,000. Diane had been sending $60,000 to Sophie's bakery over the course of a decade. And I never knew. I never noticed. I flipped through the statements. The first one was dated 10 years ago. Sophie, would have been 34 then. I remembered the photograph of her standing in front of that storefront, flour on her apron, pride in her eyes. She had opened that bakery on her own, or so she thought. But Diane had been there the whole time. Invisible. Silent. Keeping her daughter's dream alive from a hidden room above a garage in Michigan. I pulled out more papers. A printed email from a business attorney. It explained how to set up an anonymous investment through a holding company. How to structure payments so the recipient would never know the source. Diane had thought of everything. She had planned this down to the last detail. Made sure Sophie would never find out. Made sure the money would look like it came from a stranger who simply believed in a small-town bakery. I leaned back in the chair. The weight of it pressed down on me. Diane had been living two lives. The one I saw every day. The wife who made dinner, who tended the garden, who sat on the porch watching the sunset, and the one hidden in this room. The mother who never stopped fighting, who never stopped watching, who poured her love into envelopes and bank transfers because it was the only way she knew how. I reached for the wooden box. It was sitting beside the journal, small and plain, the lid held shut by a simple brass latch. I opened it. Photographs, dozens of them, all of Sophie. The first was a baby. Tiny, wrapped in a yellow blanket, eyes squeezed shut. On the back, in Diane's handwriting, Sophie, 8 weeks old. The last photo I have of her, in my arms. I set it down carefully and picked up the next. A toddler with dark curly hair, sitting in a high chair, face covered in what looked like applesauce. Then a girl of about 6, standing in front of a school backpack nearly as big as she was. Then a teenager, awkward and thin, her smile uncertain, like she was not sure the camera deserved it. And then a woman, grown, strong, standing behind a counter covered in pastries, her hands dusted white, her apron stained with chocolate. She was looking directly at the camera, and the expression on her face hit me like a fist. It was Diane's expression. The same quiet certainty, the same stubborn warmth. I turned the photograph over. Sophie, age 44, still alone, still building, still surviving. I love her more than I can carry. I set the box down and closed my eyes for a moment. My throat was tight. My chest ached. This woman, my wife, had carried this weight for 37 years without ever letting it show, without ever breaking down in front of me, without ever asking for help. She had done it all alone in this room, surrounded by photographs of a daughter she could not touch. I opened the journal again and flipped to the final pages. The handwriting here was different. Shaky. Uneven. These were written recently, in the last weeks of her life, when her hands could barely hold the pen. Frank, she wrote, I am running out of time. The doctors say weeks, maybe less, and I cannot leave this world without telling you the truth. I should have told you years ago. I should have trusted you. But I was so afraid. Afraid you would look at me differently. Afraid you would think I was damaged. Afraid you would not want a wife who had given up her child. Even though I did not give her up. They took her from me. But the world does not see it that way. The world sees a teenage mother who lost her baby. And I could not bear for you to see me that way too. I whispered to the empty room. I would never have seen you that way, Diane. Never. She continued on the next page. But now I need you to do something for me. Something I could never do myself. Find Sophie. She is 44 years old. She runs a bakery called Sophie's Sweet Corner in a small town in Wisconsin. She has no family, no husband, no children. She has spent her entire life believing that no one wanted her, that her mother threw her away. And that is not true. It was never true. I wanted her every single day of my life. The next paragraph made me sit up straight. And Frank, there is something else you need to know. 5 years ago, I found my filing cabinet open. Papers moved, things out of order. I thought I was being careless. But then it happened again, and again, and then one night, I saw Derek in my office. He did not see me watching him. He was going through my files. The adoption records. The detective reports. Everything. He found it all. And he never said a word to me. Never asked. Never confronted me. He just put everything back and walked away like nothing happened. My jaw clenched. 5 years. Derek had known about Sophie for 5 years. Through every holiday dinner. Through every phone call. Through Diane's entire illness. He sat there knowing. And he said nothing. I do not know why he kept silent, Diane wrote. Maybe he was waiting. Maybe he was planning. But I know my son, Frank. I know what he cares about. And it is not family. It is what this family owns. He will see Sophie as a threat. He will try to keep her away from you. From this house. From everything I want to leave her. Do not let him win, Frank. Please. Find her. Bring her home. Give her the family I never could. The journal ended there. The last page. The last words she ever wrote. I closed it slowly and held it against my chest. The room was silent except for the sound of my own breathing and the faint whistle of wind through that small window. I looked at the photograph of Sophie one more time. 44 years old. Dark eyes. Diane's face. Standing behind a counter in a bakery in Wisconsin, alone, building a life from nothing because no one ever gave her anything. Because the system failed her. Because her mother was trapped behind fear and shame and a promise she made me keep. I stood up. My knees ached. My back was stiff. I had been sitting in that room for hours without realizing it. The light through the window had shifted from morning gray to afternoon gold. The lake outside glimmered. I knew what I had to do. Diane had asked me to find Sophie. She had begged me with her dying words. And she had warned me about Derek. About his silence. About his plans. Whatever he was waiting for, whatever he had been calculating for 5 years, I could not let it stop me. I tucked the journal under my arm. I put the photographs back in the box and carried it with me. I walked out of the room, down through the hole in the garage ceiling, and into the kitchen. I set everything on the table and looked out the window at the lake one more time. Tomorrow morning, I was driving to Wisconsin. I was going to find Sophie. And I was going to do it before Derek had any idea what was happening. I left before the sun came up. 5:30 in the morning. The lake was black and still. The air so cold it burned my lungs when I stepped outside. I had barely slept. My mind kept turning over everything I had read. Everything I had seen. Sophie's face. Diane's words. Derek's silence. I was loading the journal and the box of photographs into the passenger seat of my truck when my phone buzzed. Derek. I stared at the screen for 3 rings before answering. Morning, Dad. His voice was flat. Casual. Like nothing in the world was wrong. Morning. What are you doing today? My hand tightened on the truck door. I could not tell him. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was walking into. Visiting an old friend, I said. Up north. There was a pause. A long one. An old friend. He repeated slowly. Who? Nobody you would know. Another pause. He hung up without saying goodbye. I stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in my hand. 5 years he had known. 5 years of phone calls just like this one. Asking casual questions. Keeping track. I wondered how many of those calls had been about concern and how many had been about surveillance. I climbed into the truck and pulled out of the driveway. The headlights cut through the darkness as I turned onto the main road. 6 hours to Wisconsin. 6 hours to decide what I was going to say to a woman who did not know I existed. The first 2 hours I drove in silence. No radio. No music. Just the hum of the engine and the empty road stretching ahead. The farms rolled by in the early light. Silos and barns, frost on the fields. Michigan giving way to the flat expanse of the interstate. By the 3rd hour, the questions started. What was I going to say? How do you walk up to a 44-year-old woman and tell her that her mother loved her, that her mother watched over her for her entire life, but was too afraid to reach out? That she was not abandoned, not thrown away, but stolen by a system that decided a 17-year-old girl with nothing was not worth trusting? What if Sophie did not believe me? What if she slammed the door? What if she looked at me with those dark eyes, Diane's eyes, and said it was too late, that she did not care, that she had spent too many years alone to let a stranger in now? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. My hands were sweating despite the cold. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe I should turn around. Maybe I should go home and lock that room back up and pretend I never found it. But I could not. Diane had asked me. With her last words, with her dying breath, she had begged me. Find her. Bring her home. I kept driving. By noon, I crossed into Wisconsin. The town was small. One main street lined with brick buildings and bare trees. A diner on the corner. A hardware store. A post office with an American flag hanging limp in the still air. And halfway down the block, between a used bookstore and a laundromat, was a small storefront with a hand-painted sign. Sophie's Sweet Corner. I parked across the street and turned off the engine. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Through the front window, I could see movement inside. Warm light, glass display cases full of pastries, and behind the counter, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a white apron dusted with flour. She was arranging something on a tray, her movements quick and confident. Sophie. I sat there for 20 minutes. Maybe longer. I watched her serve customers, watched her smile, watched her wipe down the counter and refill the coffee pot. She moved like someone who had built this place with her own hands and was proud of every inch of it. And she had no idea that the woman who made it possible was gone. Finally, I opened the truck door. The cold air hit me, and I forced myself to move. One foot in front of the other. Across the street, up the sidewalk, to the glass door, with the little bell above it. I pushed it open. The bell chimed. The smell hit me first. Butter, sugar, vanilla, warm bread. It smelled like a home should smell. Sophie looked up from behind the counter, and I forgot how to breathe. It was like looking at Diane, 30 years younger. The same dark eyes, the same shape of her face, the same way she tilted her head slightly when she was studying something. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, unable to speak. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was warm but cautious. The voice of someone who had learned early that strangers do not always bring good things. "My name is Frank Morrison," I said. My voice came out rough, shaking. "I was married to a woman named Diane." She frowned, confused. "I do not know anyone named Diane. She was your mother." The words landed between us like a stone dropped into still water. Sophie's hand stopped mid-motion. The tray she was holding tilted slightly. Her eyes locked onto mine. Searching, suspicious, afraid. "My mother," she said quietly, "left me at a foster care office when I was 2 months old. I do not know who she was. I do not know who you are. She did not leave you," I said. "They took you from her. There was a fire. She was 17. She had nothing. And the county decided she was not fit to keep you." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the journal. Then the box of photographs. I held them out to her. "She never stopped looking for you, Sophie. She never stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Sophie stared at the journal in my hands. Her face had gone pale. Her lips pressed together hard, like she was trying to hold something in. She set the tray down slowly and wiped her hands on her apron. "How do I know this is real?" she whispered. "Read it," I said. "It is all in there. Her words, her handwriting, everything she could not say to you in person." Sophie took the journal from my hands. She opened it carefully, like it might crumble to dust. Her eyes moved across the first page, then the second. I watched her face change, the suspicion melting, the walls coming down. One by one, she got to the bank statements. The anonymous angel investor. Her hands started to shake. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and red. "The money," she whispered. "All these years, I thought it was some random investor who believed in my bakery." Her voice broke. It was her. It was my mother. She put the journal down on the counter and pressed both hands over her face. Her shoulders shook. A sound came out of her that was not quite a cry, and not quite a scream. It was something deeper, something that had been locked inside her for 44 years. I did not move. I did not speak. I just stood there and let her feel it. The truth, the love, the 37 years of watching from a distance, all of it hitting her at once. After a long time, Sophie lifted her face from her hands. Her eyes were swollen. Her cheeks were wet. But something had changed in her expression. The suspicion was gone. The walls were down. In their place was something raw and open and fragile. Something that looked like the beginning of belief. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at me. She watched me. Sophie said quietly, "My whole life." "She was there. Every single day," I said. "She never left you, Sophie." "Not really." Sophie picked up the journal again and turned to a page near the middle. She read silently for a moment, then whispered. "She wrote about my 8th birthday. She said Robert sent her a photograph of me blowing out candles. She said she cried the whole night." Sophie closed the journal and held it against her chest. "I remember that birthday. I was with my 3rd family, the Pattersons. They forgot to buy a cake, so the neighbor made one. I thought nobody cared." "She cared," I said. "She always cared." We stood there in the quiet bakery for a long time. The morning rush had not started yet. It was just us, and the smell of warm bread, and the weight of 44 years pressing down on both of us. Finally, Sophie looked up at me. "You said she wanted you to find me." "Yes. What did she want you to do?" I took a breath. "She wanted me to bring you home. To the house. To the family. She wanted you to have what she could never give you." Sophie's jaw tightened. I could see her fighting it. The hope, the fear, the instinct that told her not to trust this. Not to believe it. Because every time she had believed in something, it had been taken away. "Home," she whispered. "I have never had a home. Not a real one." "You do now," I said. "If you want it." She closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek. Then she nodded. Slowly. Barely. But enough. Sophie closed the bakery that afternoon. She put a sign in the window that said, "Family emergency. Back soon." She packed a bag. She loaded it into her old truck, a dented blue Ford that had seen better days. And she followed me out of that small Wisconsin town onto the interstate heading east. I watched her in my rearview mirror the whole way. Her truck rattled and swayed behind mine, keeping pace. 6 hours of driving. 6 hours of watching that blue Ford in my mirror and thinking about what was waiting for us. About Derek. About what he might do when he found out. I had not told him. I could not. Not until Sophie was safe. Not until she was home. But I knew he would find out eventually. He always did. By the time we reached Traverse City, the sun was beginning to set. The sky over the lake was painted in deep oranges and purples. The water caught the light and scattered it like broken glass. It was the kind of evening Diane would have sat on the porch and watched for hours. I pulled into the driveway and parked near the house. Sophie pulled in beside me. I got out and waited. She sat in her truck for a long moment, staring through the windshield at the house, the lake, the garden, the wide open sky. Then she opened her door and stepped out slowly. She stood there, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold November air, and looked around. Her eyes were wide. I could tell she had never seen anything like this. The lake stretching out to the horizon, the house with its stone chimney and wrap-around porch, the garden beds where Diane's perennials slept under mulch, waiting for spring. "This is it?" she asked softly. "This is it," I said. "This is home." I led her inside. The screen door creaked the way it always did. The house was warm. It smelled like coffee and old wood. I showed her the living room first. The walls were covered in framed photographs. Me and Diane on our wedding day. Derek. As a baby. The farm through the seasons. A lifetime in frames. Sophie stopped in front of one photograph. Diane, maybe 25 years old, standing in the garden holding a basket of tomatoes, smiling, happy, young. Sophie reached out and touched the glass with her fingertips. Her hand was trembling. She was beautiful. Sophie whispered. "She was," I said. "And you look just like her." Sophie pulled her hand back and held it against her chest. She did not say anything. She just stood there, looking at the mother she had never known. The mother who had loved her from a hidden room for 37 years. That first evening we sat on the porch together. I made coffee. The lake was silver in the last light of day. The air was cold and clean. Neither of us said much. We did not need to. There was a comfort in the silence. A rightness to it, like the house itself had been waiting for her. "Diane used to sit right there," I said, nodding toward the chair Sophie had chosen. "Every morning, coffee in both hands, watching the sunrise." Sophie looked down at the chair, then back at the lake. A small smile crossed her face. The first real smile I had seen from her. "I can see why," she said quietly. That night, as I was heading inside, Sophie stopped me on the porch. "Frank," she said. I turned. She was standing in the doorway, backlit by the warm light from the kitchen. "Thank you," she said, "for finding me, for bringing me here, for keeping her promise." "You are family," I said. "You always were." She nodded. And for the first time, I thought she might actually believe it. I did not sleep well that night. Something kept nagging at the back of my mind. Derek's phone call that morning. The way he had paused. The way he had repeated my words back to me. Visiting an old friend. He was suspicious. I could feel it. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I walked outside to get the newspaper and stopped on the driveway. Something was wrong. There were tire marks on the gravel. Fresh ones. Not mine. Not Sophie's. Someone had pulled into the driveway during the night and parked there. Then left. I went back inside and pulled up the security camera footage on my phone. The system was old but functional. I had installed it 2 years ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I scrolled through the overnight recordings until I found it. 2:14 in the morning. A dark sedan pulling into the driveway with its headlights off. It parked near the mailbox. The engine stayed running. For 45 minutes, someone sat inside that car in the dark, watching the house. Then the car backed out slowly and drove away. I zoomed in on the license plate. My stomach dropped. I knew that plate. I had seen it 100 times, parked in front of restaurants and office buildings in my own driveway. It was Derek's car. I did not tell Sophie about the camera footage. Not yet. I did not want to scare her. She had only been here one day. She was just beginning to breathe, to settle, to believe that this might be real. I was not going to ruin that with fear. Not until I understood what Derek was planning. 2 days passed. Quiet days. Good days. Sophie and I fell into a rhythm that surprised me with how natural it felt. Coffee on the porch at sunrise. Walks through the garden where I pointed out which beds Diane had planted. Afternoons where I showed her around the property, the tool shed, the dock, the old boat that had not been in the water for years. She asked questions about everything. About the house. About Diane. About what life had been like here for 37 years. And I told her. I told her about Diane's laugh. About how she hummed while she cooked. about her stubbornness, her warmth, her way of making everyone around her feel like they mattered. Sophie listened to every word, like she was collecting pieces of a puzzle she had been trying to solve her entire life. On the third morning, I was making breakfast. Eggs and toast. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, looking out the window at the lake. The morning light was soft and golden. Everything felt still. Safe. Then I heard a car door slam in the driveway. I looked at Sophie. She looked at me. Neither of us moved. Heavy footsteps crossed the gravel. Then up the porch stairs. The front door opened without a knock. Derek walked into the kitchen. He was wearing a charcoal overcoat. His hair was combed back. His smile was wide and easy. But his eyes were not smiling. They moved from me to Sophie to the second coffee mug on the table to the jacket hanging on the back of her chair. I watched him calculate. I watched him process. "Morning, Dad," he said brightly. "Thought I would stop by. Check on you." "Morning, Derek," I said carefully. I set the spatula down and turned to face him fully. "You could have called. Wanted to see you in person." His eyes flicked to Sophie again. "And who is this?" Sophie straightened in her chair. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She met his gaze directly, and I saw something in her posture shift. A readiness. A woman who had spent her life reading rooms, reading people, reading danger. "Derek," I said slowly. "Sit down. We need to talk." "I am fine standing." His smile did not waver. "Who is she, Dad?" I took a breath. "Her name is Sophie. She is your mother's daughter." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Derek's smile froze on his face. For exactly 2 seconds, something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or anger, or fear. Then it was gone. Replaced by that polished, controlled expression I had seen him wear in courtrooms and boardrooms his entire career. "Mom's daughter," he repeated slowly. "That is quite a story." "It is not a story," I said. "It is the truth. Diane had a daughter before we were married. She was 17. The county took Sophie away from her after a fire. Diane spent her whole life watching over her. She left a journal. She asked me to find Sophie and bring her home." Derek let out a short breath through his nose. Almost a laugh. "And you just believed it. You found some old papers in the attic and drove across state lines to bring a complete stranger into our home." "She is not a stranger," I said firmly. "She is family. Family." Derek's voice was flat. He looked at Sophie for a long moment, studying her, measuring her. Then he spoke directly to her for the first time. "So, Sophie, what did you do before this? Before my father showed up and offered you a house on the lake?" Sophie set her coffee mug down calmly. "I ran a bakery," she said, "for 12 years. Built it from nothing. No help from anyone." She paused, or so I thought. "A bakery," Derek repeated. He smiled again, but it was a different smile now. Thin, cold. "And now you are here, in a house worth $2.3 million, sitting at my mother's table, drinking from her mugs." "Derek," I warned. He held up his hand. "I am just asking questions, Dad. Someone has to." He turned back to Sophie. "You grew up in foster care. Is that right?" Sophie's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed steady. 7 homes. "Yes, 7 homes." Derek nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he already knew. "That is a lot of instability, a lot of uncertainty. And now you are here, in a very stable, very certain, very valuable property. You can understand why I might be concerned." "Derek." "That is enough," I said, my voice rising, but Sophie spoke before I could say more. She looked Derek dead in the eye and said, "I know what you are doing. I have met men like you before. Men who measure everything in dollars and property lines. Men who see a woman like me and immediately calculate what she might cost them. Derek's smile faltered. Just barely. Just enough for me to notice. Sophie continued, her voice calm and clear. I am not here for your inheritance, Derek. I am not here for money. I am here because your mother asked your father to find me, because she watched over me for 37 years and loved me from a distance. That is more than you seem willing to do for your own father. The room went silent. Derek stared at Sophie. Sophie stared back. Neither blinked. I could feel the air between them vibrating with something dangerous. Something that was not going to end here. Finally, Derek turned back to me. His mask was back in place. Smooth. Controlled. But underneath, I could see the crack. The anger he was working very hard to contain. Dad, he said. His voice soft now. Gentle. Almost tender. I am worried about you. I really am. You are 66 years old. You just lost Mom. You are grieving, and in that state, you drove across state lines and brought a stranger into your home based on an old notebook you found in a wall. She is not a stranger, I said again. Dad. He stepped closer, put his hand on my shoulder. Squeezed. Your memory. Your judgment. I think maybe we need to talk to a doctor, just to make sure everything is okay up here. He tapped his temple lightly, casually, like it was nothing. But I knew exactly what it was. It was not concern. It was not love. It was the first move in a chess game I did not yet fully understand. He was laying groundwork, building a case, planting seeds in whatever mind might be listening. I looked my son in the eye. I am fine, Derek. He smiled, patted my shoulder. Of course you are, Dad. Of course you are. Then he turned, walked to the door, and left without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Quiet, controlled, deliberate. Sophie exhaled slowly. Her hands were shaking slightly around her mug. That was not a son checking on his father, she said softly. No. I agreed. It was not. He is going to try something, she said. I have seen that look before. In caseworkers. In landlords. In people who want to take things from you and make it look like they are helping. I nodded. She was right, and I knew. Standing there in Diane's kitchen with Diane's daughter sitting at Diane's table, that whatever was coming next was going to be worse than a late-night visit and a cold smile. 2 weeks of silence. That was what Derek gave us. 14 days of nothing. No phone calls, no visits, no car parked in the driveway at 2 in the morning. Just quiet. And that quiet frightened me more than anything he could have said. I know my son. I raised him. I watched him grow from a curious little boy into a man who measured the world in assets and leverage. And I know that when Derek goes quiet, it does not mean he has given up. It means he is building something, constructing it piece by piece in the dark where no one can see. Sophie noticed it too. She did not say much about it, but I caught her glancing at the driveway sometimes, checking the windows at night. She had spent her life reading danger before it arrived, and she could feel it now. The way animals feel a storm coming long before the sky turns dark. But we kept living. We had to. Sophie helped me winterize the garden beds. She cooked dinners that filled the house with warmth and scent. She told me about her bakery, about the recipes she had created over the years, about the regular customers who had become like family to her. And I told her more about Diane, about the early years, about how we built this house together, board by board, about how Diane would stand right where Sophie was standing now and say this was the most beautiful place in the world. Then, on a Tuesday morning, my phone rang. A number I did not recognize. I answered. Mr. Morrison? This is Dr. Raymond Harrison. I am calling to confirm your appointment this Thursday at 10:30. I frowned. I did not make any appointment. It was scheduled by your son, Derek Morrison. He indicated you have been experiencing some memory issues and confusion. He asked us to conduct a cognitive evaluation. My blood ran cold. I do not have memory issues, I said firmly. And I did not agree to any evaluation. There was a pause on the other end. Well, sir, the appointment is on file. Your son was quite insistent. He mentioned concerns about your decision-making capacity and cancel it, I said. I did not authorize it. My son does not speak for me. Of course, sir. I will note that in the file. I hung up and stood in the kitchen, my hand gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached. He was doing it. Exactly what Sophie had predicted. Exactly what Diane had warned me about. He was building a case. One phone call, one doctor's appointment, one medical record at a time. That afternoon, Sophie went into town to pick up groceries. She was gone longer than usual. When she came back, she was quiet. She set the bags on the counter without looking at me. Her movements were stiff, controlled, like she was holding something in. Sophie, I said. What happened? She did not answer right away. She unpacked the groceries slowly. Milk, bread, eggs. Then she stopped, her hands flat on the counter, and said, "A woman at the store asked me if I have a criminal record." I stared at her. What? Martha something. Blonde hair. Works at the deli counter. She pulled me aside and said she heard things about me. That I have a history. Debt. Legal trouble. That I am here to take advantage of you. That is not true, I said immediately. I know it is not true, Sophie said quietly. But she believed it. And she was not the only one looking at me differently today. The man at the hardware store. The woman at the post office. People I have never met before, staring at me like I am something dangerous. Derek. He was poisoning the town against her, spreading lies through the same networks he had cultivated his entire career. This was his territory. He had grown up here. He knew everyone. He sat on the Chamber of Commerce. He donated to the church fundraiser every year. His word carried weight in Traverse City. Sophie's did not. I wanted to drive to his office and confront him. I wanted to grab him by his expensive collar and demand he stop. But I knew that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to react, to look erratic, to give him ammunition. Instead, I went to my desk and pulled up the county court website. Something told me to check. Something told me the doctor and the rumors were not the end of it. They were the beginning. I searched my own name. Frank Morrison. Grand Traverse County. There it was. Filed 6 days ago. A petition for emergency guardianship evaluation. Petitioner, Derek Morrison. Subject, Frank Raymond Morrison, age 66. I clicked on the document. My hands were steady, but my chest was tight. I read slowly, carefully, every word, landing like a stone. The petition states that the subject has exhibited signs of cognitive decline, including impaired judgment, irrational decision-making, and vulnerability to financial exploitation. Specifically, the subject has invited an unrelated individual with an unstable background into his primary residence, made major financial and legal decisions without consulting family members, and refused medical evaluation despite expressed concerns from immediate family. Supporting evidence included a report from Dr. Raymond Harrison, noting observable confusion and resistance to assessment, and a statement from Derek Morrison alleging that I had become increasingly withdrawn, erratic, and susceptible to manipulation by outside parties. Every single word was a lie, dressed up in legal language, wrapped in the appearance of concern, but underneath it was nothing but greed. Nothing but a son trying to take his father's home by proving his father could not think for himself. I closed the laptop and sat there. The house was quiet around me. Through the window, I could see the lake, gray and cold under the December sky. Diane's garden, sleeping beneath the frost. Everything I had built. Everything we had built. And Derek was trying to take it all. By making the world believe I had lost my mind, the front door opened. Sophie came in carrying one last bag from the car. She set it on the counter and looked at me. Something in my face must have shown, because her expression changed immediately. The color drained from her cheeks. "What is it?" she asked. "He filed a petition," I said, "at the county court, for guardianship. He is trying to have me declared incompetent." Sophie's mouth opened, then closed. She leaned against the counter, like she needed it to hold her up. "When? 6 days ago," she shook her head slowly. "He planned this. Before he even came here. Before he saw me. He had already started." I nodded. That was exactly right. The doctor, the appointment, the rumors. It was all part of one machine, and it had been running for longer than I realized. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at me, her face pale, but her eyes steady. "Frank, someone called the health department about my bakery back in Wisconsin. They said I have violations, critical ones, enough to shut me down." Her voice shook slightly. "I have never had a single violation in 12 years. Not one." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. He was not just attacking me. He was attacking both of us. At the same time. From every angle. Cutting off Sophie's livelihood while trying to take my freedom. It was systematic. Calculated. Professional. And it was only the beginning. The envelope arrived on a Friday. White. Official. The seal of Grand Traverse County Court, stamped in the upper left corner. I found it in the mailbox that morning, sandwiched between a utility bill and a flyer for a church fundraiser. My name was printed in black ink across the front. Frank Raymond Morrison. No return address needed. I already knew who it was from. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. Sophie was upstairs. I could hear her moving around, getting dressed. For a moment, I just stared at the envelope. I did not want to open it. I knew that whatever was inside was going to change everything, that once I read those words, there would be no going back. I opened it anyway. Temporary restraining order. Case number 2024GC 1187. Petitioner, Derek Morrison. The court finds sufficient preliminary evidence to suggest that the individual known as Sophie Morrison poses a potential risk of undue influence and financial exploitation upon the subject, Frank Raymond Morrison, age 66, who is currently the subject of a pending guardianship evaluation. Effective immediately, the respondent, Sophie Morrison, is ordered to maintain a distance of no less than 500 feet from the subject's residence, and to have no direct or indirect contact with the subject until the guardianship hearing is concluded. I read it twice. 3 times. The words blurred together. My hands were shaking. Not from weakness, from rage. Sophie came downstairs. She was wearing one of Diane's old sweaters, the cream-colored one with the loose sleeves. She looked warm, comfortable, like she belonged here, because she did belong here. "Frank?" She saw my face and stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "What is that?" I could not speak for a moment. I just held the paper out to her. She crossed the kitchen and took it from my hands. I watched her read it, watched the color leave her face one shade at a time, watched her lips press together, watched her eyes go from confusion to understanding to something that looked like a door closing. "I have to leave," she said quietly. "No," I said. "Frank." She set the paper down on the table. Her voice was calm. Too calm. "If I stay, I am violating a court order. They can arrest me. They can use it against you in the hearing. It will make everything worse." She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing it did not make it hurt any less. "How long?" I asked. "Until the hearing." She looked at the paper again. "It does not give a date. Just says, until the matter is resolved." We stood there in the kitchen for a long time. The lake was visible through the window behind her, frozen solid now, white, and still under the gray December sky. The house felt like it was holding its breath. Sophie went upstairs and packed her bag. It did not take long. She had not brought much. A suitcase. A few things from the bakery she had grabbed before leaving Wisconsin. That was it. Her entire life fit in one bag and a dented blue truck. I walked her to the driveway. The air was bitter cold. Our breath came out in white clouds. She loaded the suitcase into the truck bed and turned to face me. Her eyes were dry, but there was something broken behind them, something she was working very hard to hold together. "I will come back," she said. "I promise you, Frank. I will come back. I know you will," I said. But my voice cracked on the last word. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were cold. Then she let go, climbed into the truck, and started the engine. I stood on the driveway and watched her pull out. The blue truck turned left onto the main road and disappeared behind the bare trees. The sound of the engine faded, and then it was just me, standing alone in the cold, staring at an empty road. I went back inside. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your ears, that fills every room and corner and hallway until you cannot think. I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at the chair where Sophie had been sitting an hour ago. Her coffee mug was still there, half full, still warm. My phone rang. "Derek," I answered without thinking. "Hi, Dad." His voice was light, pleasant, like he was calling to check the weather. "Just wanted to see how you are doing." I said nothing. "I know this is hard," he continued, "but it is for your own good. I am trying to protect you, Dad. That woman was taking advantage of you. You were not thinking clearly. But now you can rest. Now things can go back to normal." I found my voice. It was quiet, flat. "Your mother was right about you." Silence on the other end. Then, "What did you say?" "Diane knew," I said. "She wrote about you, about what you would do. She warned me, and I did not listen fast enough." Another silence. Longer this time. Then Derek said, "I do not know what you are talking about, Dad. Get some rest. I will check on you soon." He hung up. I set the phone down on the table, and then I did something I had not done since the day Diane died. I cried. Not quiet tears, not the dignified grief of a man at a funeral. I put my head down on the kitchen table and I sobbed. For Diane, for Sophie, for the family I thought I had, and the son I thought I raised, for the house that was too big, and too empty, and too quiet, for all of it. I cried until there was nothing left, until the kitchen was dark, and the coffee was cold, and the lake outside the window was invisible in the night. And then I sat up, wiped my face with my sleeve, took a breath. 30 miles away, in a motel off the highway, Sophie Morrison was not crying. She was sitting on the edge of a thin mattress under yellow fluorescent light. Her suitcase was on the floor unopened. The room smelled like disinfectant and old carpet. The heater rattled against the wall. She had her laptop open on the small desk by the window. The screen glowed blue-white in the dark room. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose, with focus, with the steady calm of someone who had been knocked down before and always gotten back up. She typed, "How to fight a guardianship petition." Then, "Elder. Financial exploitation by family members." Then, "Pro bono elder abuse attorneys, Michigan." Sophie Morrison had grown up in 7 foster homes. She had been moved, uprooted, abandoned, and told she was not worth keeping more times than most people could survive. She had built a business from nothing. She had fed herself when no one else would. She had learned, the hard way, that the only person who would ever fight for her was herself. Until now. Now she had Frank. and she was not going to let Derek take him away. She pulled up a legal aid directory and started making a list. Tomorrow morning she would start calling. Tomorrow morning, the fight would begin. Sophie made 14 phone calls the next morning. 12 went to voicemail. One said they were not taking new cases. But the 14th call changed everything. Margaret Chen worked out of a small office above a Thai restaurant on Division Street in Grand Rapids. She was a senior attorney at the Michigan Elder Justice Coalition, a nonprofit that handled pro bono cases involving financial exploitation of the elderly. She had been doing this work for 15 years. She had seen every version of this story. Sons draining bank accounts, daughters forging signatures, grandchildren filing false guardianship petitions to seize property. When Sophie called and explained the situation, Margaret did not hesitate. "Come see me today," she said. 2:00. Sophie drove an hour south. The office was small, cluttered with files and legal books stacked on every surface. Margaret was in her mid-40s, lean and sharp, with reading glasses pushed up into her black hair. She shook Sophie's hand firmly and gestured to a chair. "Tell me everything," Margaret said. "From the beginning." So Sophie did. She told her about Diane, about the journal, about Frank finding her in Wisconsin, about coming to Michigan, about Derek's visit, his threats, the doctor, the rumors, the guardianship petition, and the restraining order. She laid it all out. Steady and clear. The way she had learned to present her case to caseworkers and judges and foster parents her entire life. Margaret listened without interrupting. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen moving in quick strokes. When Sophie finished, Margaret set her pen down and leaned back in her chair. "This is textbook," Margaret said. "Textbook financial exploitation disguised as protective concern. I have seen it dozens of times. A family member files for guardianship not because the subject is incapacitated, but because they want control of assets. They manufacture evidence of incompetence. They isolate the subject from support systems. They use the legal process as a weapon. Can you stop it?" Sophie asked. "I can do more than stop it," Margaret said. "If what you are telling me is true, and I believe it is, then Derek Morrison has committed fraud, filing false medical reports, fabricating criminal records, using the court system under false pretenses. Those are felonies in Michigan." Sophie felt something loosen in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe. "But we need evidence," Margaret continued. "Solid, documented, undeniable evidence. Right now it is your word against his, and he has the advantage. He is local. He is a professional. He has relationships in this community. We need to take that advantage away from him, piece by piece." Margaret pulled out a fresh notepad and began outlining a strategy. First, the doctor. Dr. Raymond Harrison. We need to find out exactly who he is and what his qualifications are. If Derek hired a general practitioner to conduct a cognitive evaluation after one 15-minute visit, that is a serious procedural violation. Those assessments require a specialist, a neuropsychologist, minimum 2 hours of testing. Anything less is medically and legally insufficient. Sophie nodded, writing it all down. Second, your so-called criminal record. Someone told people in Traverse City that you have legal trouble. We need to find out where that information came from. If Derek fabricated a background check or hired a service to create false records, that is forgery and defamation. Third, Margaret said, leaning forward, the health department complaint against your bakery. Call your contacts in Wisconsin. Find out exactly when the complaint was filed, from what number, and what specific violations were alleged. If there are no actual violations, and the complaint came from an anonymous or untraceable source, that establishes a pattern of harassment. Sophie called her assistant manager in Wisconsin that afternoon from Margaret's office. Lisa confirmed what Sophie already knew. The health department had investigated and found 0 violations. The complaint had come from a prepaid phone number with no registered owner. They said it happens sometimes, Lisa told her. Competitor complaints, disgruntled customers. But Sophie, you have never had a single issue. Not in 12 years. The inspector actually apologized for wasting your time. Sophie hung up and looked at Margaret. No violations. Anonymous number. Margaret smiled thinly. Pattern established. Over the next 3 days, Margaret worked fast. She filed a motion to challenge the restraining order. She submitted a formal request for Dr. Harrison's full credentials and the details of his evaluation, and what came back confirmed everything. Dr. Raymond Harrison was a general practitioner. Family medicine. He had no certification in neuropsychology, no training in cognitive assessment, and no specialization in geriatric care. His evaluation of Frank consisted of one office visit lasting exactly 15 minutes, during which Frank had refused to participate. Harrison's report noted observable confusion and resistance to assessment, but there was no standardized test. No MMSE, no Montreal Cognitive Assessment, no clinical basis whatsoever for the conclusions Derek had submitted to the court. This is garbage, Margaret said, reading the report. Any judge worth their robe will throw this out in 5 minutes. But it was the next discovery that made Sophie's hands shake. Margaret had submitted a records request for Sophie's alleged criminal history. What came back was a background report from an online service called Quick Verify Pro. The report listed 2 felony convictions, a bankruptcy, and a restraining order violation. All fabricated. All attached to Sophie's name and social security number. Margaret traced the payment for the report. It was purchased with a credit card. The card belonged to Derek Morrison. That is fraud, Margaret said quietly. Federal fraud. Potentially. Since it involves falsified identity records, he used a paid service to manufacture a criminal history and then distributed it to discredit you. Sophie stared at the printout. Derek's name. His card number. The date of purchase. 2 weeks before he even showed up at Frank's kitchen. He planned this before he met me, Sophie said. Before he even knew Frank had found me. He knew about you for 5 years. Margaret reminded her. He has been planning this a lot longer than 2 weeks. Sophie sat back in her chair. The pieces were falling into place. The doctor was compromised. The criminal record was fabricated. The health department complaint was baseless. They had enough to challenge the petition. But Margaret wanted more. We need direct evidence, she said. Something that proves Derek personally orchestrated this. An email, a recording, a document trail. Something a judge cannot ignore. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she remembered. The security cameras. Frank had installed cameras around the house 2 years ago. If Derek had come to the house to take documents or plant evidence, those cameras would have captured it. Frank has security cameras, Sophie said, sitting up straight. At the house. If Derek went there to steal medical records or access files, it is on video. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Can you get access to that footage? I cannot contact Frank directly, Sophie said. The restraining order, but someone else can. Margaret said. A neighbor. A friend. Someone who can pass along a message without violating the order. Sophie thought for a moment. Then she nodded. Bill Henderson. Frank's next-door neighbor. He has known Frank for 20 years. Frank trusts him. Margaret wrote the name down. Get me that footage, Sophie. Get me that footage, and I will end this. Bill Henderson was 71 years old. He had lived next door to us for 2 decades. He was the kind of neighbor who showed up with a casserole when someone was sick and a shovel when the driveway needed plowing. He had known Diane. He had cried at her funeral, and when Sophie called him from the motel and explained what was happening, he did not hesitate. Tell me what you need, Bill said. I need you to go see Frank, Sophie said. I cannot contact him directly. The court order. But I need the login information for his security cameras. The username and password for the system. I will go this afternoon, Bill said. That boy of his, I always knew something was off about Derek. Too slick. Too polished. Never once came by to check on his father after Diane passed. Not once until you showed up. That afternoon, Bill walked across the yard and knocked on Frank's door. I know this because Frank told me later. After everything was over, Bill sat at the kitchen table with Frank and explained what Sophie was doing, what Margaret was building, what they needed. Frank did not hesitate either. He wrote down the camera login on a piece of paper, the IP address, the username, the password. He handed it to Bill and said, "Tell her to look at the footage from November 28th, 2 in the morning, and December 3rd. Around midnight." Bill passed the information to Sophie that evening. She was sitting in her motel room, the heater rattling, the walls thin enough to hear the highway traffic outside. She opened her laptop and typed in the IP address. The security system loaded. 12 cameras, front porch, back door, garage, driveway, dock, and one pointed directly at the front entrance of the house. She scrolled back to November 28th, 2:14 in the morning, and there he was, Derek's dark sedan, pulling into the driveway. Headlights off, engine running. He sat in the car for several minutes. Then the driver's door opened, and Derek stepped out. He was wearing dark clothes, a baseball cap pulled low. He walked around to the side of the house, to the door that led into the mudroom. Sophie watched him try the handle. It opened. Frank never locked the mudroom door. Derek slipped inside. The camera lost him there, but the interior hallway camera picked him up again. A shadow moving through the darkened house. Past the kitchen, up the stairs, into the master bedroom where Frank was sleeping. The footage was grainy, shot in infrared night vision. But it was clear enough. Derek moved to the nightstand on Frank's side of the bed. He opened the drawer slowly, carefully, and removed something. A folder. Then he moved to Diane's old filing cabinet in the corner of the room. He opened the top drawer and rifled through papers for nearly 3 minutes. He took photographs of several documents with his phone. The flash lit up his face each time. Clear. Unmistakable. Derek Morrison, in his father's bedroom, at 2 in the morning, stealing medical records and photographing financial documents while his father slept 6 feet away. Sophie felt her stomach turn. She saved the footage. Then she scrolled to December 3rd. This one was different. Same time. Same car. Same dark clothes. But this time Derek did not go inside. He stood at the mailbox for 2 minutes. Sophie watched him open it, place something inside, and close it again. Then he got back in his car and drove away. The next morning, according to the timestamp, Frank retrieved the mail. Inside was the utility bill and the church flyer, and the envelope from the court. Derek had hand-delivered the restraining order himself. Not through the mail. Not through a process server. He had driven to his father's house in the middle of the night and placed it in the mailbox like a threat. Sophie sent both clips to Margaret that night. By the next morning, Margaret had added them to the case file. Then she called Sophie with one more piece of information. "I subpoenaed Derek's communication records," Margaret said. "Emails. Primarily. His business account. I found something." "What?" "An email chain between Derek and a company called Lakeview Development Partners. It is a real estate development firm out of Grand Rapids. They specialize in lakefront properties." Sophie waited. Her grip on the phone tightened. "The emails go back 4 months," Margaret continued. "Before Diane even passed away. Derek contacted them about the Morrison property. He described it as a lakefront estate, approximately 3,000 square feet, with direct water access. He told them it would be available for purchase within 6 months. 4 months ago," Sophie repeated. "Diane was still alive. 4 months ago." "Yes," Margaret said. "She was. And here is the worst part. 3 weeks ago, after the guardianship petition was filed, Derek signed a preliminary sales agreement with Lakeview Development. contingent on one condition. What condition? That he obtains legal authority over the property through guardianship or power of attorney. The agreement is signed. The price is set. $2.4 million. All he needs is the court to declare Frank incompetent, and the sale goes through. Sophie set the phone down on the desk. Her hands were steady, but her jaw was tight. 4 months ago, Derek had already been planning to sell his father's home. Before Diane died, before Sophie existed in his world, he was waiting for his mother to die so he could take what he wanted. Sophie showing up had not created his greed. It had only accelerated his timeline. "We have everything," Margaret said. The fraudulent medical evaluation, the fabricated criminal record, the video evidence of Derek entering the home without authorization and stealing documents, and now the sales agreement proving financial motive. This is not a guardianship case anymore, Sophie. This is elder abuse. And when we walk into that courtroom, Derek Morrison is going to wish he had never filed that petition. Sophie stared out the motel window. The parking lot was empty. The sky was beginning to lighten. Dawn was coming, and for the first time since she had driven away from that lake house, she felt something close to certainty. "When is the hearing?" she asked. 2 weeks, Margaret said. January 14th. And Sophie, one more thing. What? When we present this evidence, it will not just end the guardianship case. It will likely result in criminal referral. Derek could face felony charges, fraud, forgery, attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, his career, his license, everything. It will be over. Sophie closed her eyes. She thought about Frank, about Diane, about the journal and the photographs, and the woman who had loved her from a hidden room for 37 years. She thought about Derek, sitting in that dark car at 2 a.m, watching the house he planned to steal. "Good," Sophie said quietly. "Let it be over." January 14th. The morning was bitter cold, single digits. The kind of Michigan winter morning where the air hurts your face and the sky looks like iron. I drove to the courthouse alone. My truck heater barely worked. My hands were stiff on the steering wheel. But my mind was clear. Clearer than it had been in months. The Grand Traverse County Courthouse was a red brick building on Boardman Avenue. 2 stories. Stone. Steps. The American flag hung frozen against its pole, too cold to wave. I parked in the lot behind the building and sat there for a moment, watching people file in through the front entrance. And there were a lot of people. Neighbors I recognized. Bill Henderson, Martha Crane from the grocery store, George Palmer from the hardware shop. People who had heard the rumors. People who had watched this unfold from a distance, and now they were here to see how it ended. I even saw a woman with a notepad, a reporter from the Record Eagle. This was news now. My family's destruction had become entertainment for the county. I walked up the steps and through the metal detectors. The hallway smelled like floor polish and old radiators. Courtroom B was at the end of the hall. The doors were heavy oak. I pushed them open and stepped inside. The room was nearly full. Wooden benches, high ceilings, fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly ill. I walked down the center aisle and took my seat in the front row on the left side, the respondent's side. My side. And then I saw her. Sophie. She was sitting 2 rows behind me, next to a woman I did not recognize. Asian, mid-40s, sharp eyes behind reading glasses, a leather briefcase on her lap. That had to be Margaret Chen. Sophie caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod. I nodded back. We could not speak. The restraining order was still in effect until the judge ruled otherwise. But that nod was enough. It said, "I am here. We are ready." On the other side of the aisle, Derek sat with his attorney. A man named Richard Howe. Expensive suit, silver cufflinks, the kind of lawyer you hired when you wanted to win by intimidation. Derek was leaning back in his chair, legs crossed, looking calm, confident, like he had already won, and this was just paperwork. He glanced at me once. Our eyes met. He did not smile. He did not frown. He just looked at me with that flat, empty expression that made my chest ache every time I saw it. Then, he looked away. All rise. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Everyone stood. Judge Barbara Walsh entered through the side door. She was tall, silver hair cut short, rimless glasses, a face that looked like it had heard every lie ever told and was tired of all of them. She settled into her chair and surveyed the room. "Be seated," she said. Her voice was low but carried. "We are here today for the matter of Morrison versus Morrison. Case number 2024, GC 1187. Petition for emergency guardianship." She looked up from her papers. "Counsel for the petitioner, are you ready to proceed?" Richard Howe stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "Counsel for the respondent?" Margaret Chen rose. "Ready, Your Honor." "Very well," Judge Walsh said. "Mr. Howe, present your case." Howe walked to the front of the courtroom with the kind of smooth confidence that came from decades of practice. He buttoned his jacket and began speaking without notes. "Your Honor, we are here today because a son is genuinely concerned about his elderly father's well-being. Frank Morrison is 66 years old. He recently lost his wife of 37 years. He is grieving. He is vulnerable, and in that vulnerable state, he made a series of decisions that strongly suggest impaired judgment." Howe turned slightly, gesturing toward me without looking at me directly. "Within days of his wife's funeral, Mr. Morrison drove across state lines and invited a woman he had never met before to live in his home. A woman with a documented history of instability." He paused for effect. "He has refused medical evaluation despite his son's repeated and genuine concerns. He has become withdrawn, hostile toward family members." I clenched my jaw. Every word out of his mouth was a distortion, a funhouse mirror version of the truth. "We have submitted a medical report from Dr. Raymond Harrison indicating signs of cognitive confusion. We have documentation of the respondent's erratic behavior, and we respectfully ask this court to appoint a temporary guardian to ensure Mr. Morrison's safety and the protection of his considerable assets." Howe sat down. Derek nodded slightly beside him. Satisfied. Assured. Judge Walsh turned to Margaret. "Miss Chen?" Margaret stood slowly. She did not rush. She did not perform. She simply walked to the front of the room and said, "Your Honor, the respondent would like to speak for himself. We call Frank Morrison to the stand." I stood up. My knees ached from the cold, but my steps were steady. I walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Then I sat down and looked out at the courtroom, at the neighbors, at Sophie, at Derek. Margaret approached. "Mr. Morrison, can you tell the court your full name and date of birth?" "Frank Raymond Morrison, March 15th, 1958. "And where do you currently reside?" 47 Lakeshore Drive, Traverse City. "Same house I have lived in for 37 years. "Mr. Morrison, can you describe your daily routine?" I took a breath. "I wake up around 5:30. Make coffee. In the winter, I check the pipes in the furnace. I shovel the driveway if it snowed. I make breakfast. I spend mornings working on the house. Maintenance. Repairs. Afternoons, I handle the finances. Bills, taxes. I read in the evenings. Sometimes I walk down to the dock if the weather is decent. Do you have any difficulty remembering appointments, tasks, or obligations?" "No." "Have you ever gotten lost driving familiar routes?" "No." "Have you ever forgotten the names of family members or close friends?" "No." Margaret glanced at the judge. Walsh was watching me closely. Her pen was still. "Mr. Morrison, Your son claims you invited a stranger into your home while in a state of confusion. Can you explain the circumstances? I looked directly at the judge. My wife Diane left a journal. I found it after her death, in a room she had kept hidden for 37 years. In that journal, she revealed that she had a daughter who was taken from her by the county when she was 17 years old. Diane asked me to find her daughter and bring her home. That is what I did. I was not confused. I was honoring my wife's dying wish. The courtroom was silent. I could feel every eye on me. Walsh wrote something on her notepad. Margaret nodded. No further questions at this time, Your Honor, but the Respondents' Counsel would like to present additional evidence that this petition is based entirely on fabricated documents and criminal fraud. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I looked at Derek. For the first time, his expression changed. The confidence cracked. Just slightly. Just around the edges. But I saw it, and Margaret saw it too. Judge Walsh leaned forward. That is a serious allegation, Miss Chen. Yes, Your Honor, Margaret said calmly. And we have the evidence to support it. Every piece of it. Walsh studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Proceed. Margaret walked back to her table and opened her briefcase. She pulled out a thick folder, organized with colored tabs. Every movement was deliberate. She had the truth. And she was going to lay it out piece by piece until there was nowhere left for Derek to hide. Your Honor, Margaret began. The petitioner's case rests on 3 pillars: a medical evaluation, a criminal background report, and the assertion that Frank Morrison cannot make sound decisions. She paused. All 3 are fraudulent. She held up the first document. Dr. Raymond Harrison is a general practitioner. No certification in neuropsychology. No training in cognitive assessment. His evaluation consisted of one 15-minute visit. No standardized testing. No MMSE. No Montreal Cognitive Assessment. No clinical protocol of any kind. And the appointment was scheduled by Derek Morrison without his father's knowledge or consent. Judge Walsh's eyes narrowed. She wrote something on her notepad. Mr. Morrison exercised his right to refuse an unwanted exam. Margaret continued. Dr. Harrison characterized this as confusion. A man refusing an unauthorized medical evaluation is not confused, Your Honor. He is competent. Margaret moved to the second tab. The criminal background report. It alleges Sophie Morrison has 2 felony convictions and a bankruptcy. This report was generated by Quick Verify Pro, a commercial website that produces reports based on user-submitted information. She placed a printout on the table. It was purchased on November 19th, paid for with a Visa card ending in 4721. That card is registered to Derek Allen Morrison. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Derek's face went white. Sophie Morrison has no criminal record, Margaret said firmly. She has never been arrested. She has operated a licensed business for 12 years, with 0 violations. Every allegation is fabricated. By the petitioner, Margaret pulled out a USB drive. Your Honor, I submit video evidence from Mr. Morrison's security cameras. The footage appeared on the courtroom monitor. November 28th, 2:14 in the morning. Derek walking into his father's house, moving through dark hallways, entering the master bedroom where Frank slept, opening the nightstand, taking documents, photographing files from the cabinet, his face illuminated by the phone flash. Clear, unmistakable. Then the second clip. December 3rd. Derek at the mailbox in the dark, placing the court envelope inside, driving away. Den, time, das. Den, time, den, time, time, den, time. Derek. The courtroom was completely silent. Now, before I share the judge's final decision, I want to pause and ask you something. What do you think should happen to Derek? After everything he has done, does he deserve a second chance? Or has he gone too far? Let me know in the comments. And a quick reminder, some elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. Now, let me tell you what Judge Walsh decided. Margaret placed one final document on the table. This is a preliminary sales agreement between Derek Morrison and Lakeview Development Partners, signed 3 weeks ago. It commits to selling Frank Morrison's home for $2.4 million. She let the silence stretch. Contingent on one condition: that Derek obtains legal authority through guardianship. Margaret stepped back. This is not a guardianship case, Your Honor. This is elder financial exploitation. Derek Morrison fabricated evidence, stole documents, and filed a fraudulent petition to seize control of his father's assets and sell them. The courtroom erupted. Walsh banged her gavel. Order. Silence fell. Walsh looked at Derek's attorney. Mr. Howe, does your client wish to respond? Howe leaned down and whispered to Derek. Derek did not react. He was staring at the table. Your Honor? Howe said carefully. My client requests a brief recess to— Denied, Walsh said. We are finishing this today. She looked directly at Derek. Mr. Morrison, stand up. Derek stood. His legs looked unsteady. The evidence demonstrates a systematic pattern of fraud, forgery, document theft, and attempted financial exploitation, Walsh said. This court finds no grounds whatsoever for a guardianship order. The petition is dismissed with prejudice, she continued. The temporary restraining order against Sophie Morrison is lifted immediately. She has been the victim of a calculated campaign of harassment, and this court regrets its role in enabling that harm. Walsh fixed Derek with a stare that could freeze the lake outside. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. I strongly suggest you retain competent criminal defense counsel, Mr. Morrison. Based on what I have seen today, you are going to need it. She paused. Sit down, Mr. Morrison. You have done quite enough. Derek collapsed into his chair. His lawyer was already packing. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. I stood slowly. My legs were shaking. Not from weakness, from relief, from months of weight finally lifting. I turned and looked at Sophie. She was standing 2 rows back, tears streaming down her face, Margaret's hand on her shoulder. Then I looked at Derek. He was staring at the table, his hands trembling, his jaw working. And when he finally lifted his eyes and met mine, I saw something I had not seen in him in years. It was not anger, not fear, not calculation. It was recognition. The slow, terrible recognition of what he had become. Something cracked behind those eyes. Something that looked like the beginning of shame. I did not speak. I did not smile. I just looked at my son and let him see that I saw him. All of him. The worst of him. And that I was still standing. It took 72 hours for Derek Morrison's life to collapse. Not because anyone pushed it over, because he had built it on a foundation of lies, and once the truth came out, there was nothing left to hold it up. The Michigan Real Estate Commission moved first. Within 48 hours of the court ruling, they opened a formal review of Derek's license. By the end of the week, it was suspended pending investigation. His brokerage firm released a statement distancing themselves from him. His name was removed from their website. His office was cleared out. Then the clients. One by one, they called to cancel contracts, withdrew listings, requested new agents. In a town like Traverse City, news traveled fast. Everyone knew what had happened in that courtroom. Everyone had seen the Record Eagle article. The headline read, "Local real estate agent faces fraud charges after failed guardianship bid." Derek's photograph was right there on the front page. His wife, Linda, filed for divorce on the 5th day. I heard about it from Bill Henderson, who heard it from someone at the courthouse. She moved back to her parents' house in Petoskey and took their dog with her. I did not know how to feel about that. I had never been close to Linda. She was polite but distant. The kind of daughter-in-law who sent Christmas cards, but never called. Still, it was another piece of Derek's life falling away. The district attorney moved quickly. Derek was charged with fraud, forgery, and attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. His arraignment was brief. He pleaded guilty to all charges. No bargaining. No deal. His court-appointed attorney tried to negotiate, but Derek refused. The sentencing hearing was 3 weeks later. I sat in the same courtroom. Same bench. Same judge. But this time Sophie sat beside me. The restraining order was gone. She held my hand through the whole thing. Judge Walsh sentenced Derek to 2 years of supervised probation, 600 hours of community service, mandatory psychological counseling, full restitution of all legal fees incurred by Frank and Sophie Morrison, and a permanent notation on his professional record that would follow him for the rest of his career. It was not prison. Part of me thought it should have been, but another part, the part that still remembered teaching him to ride a bicycle, the part that still saw the little boy with skin knees and a gap-toothed smile, that part was relieved. After the sentencing, Sophie and I drove home together. The lake was beginning to thaw. Patches of blue showed through the white ice. The trees along the shore were still bare, but there was something different in the air. A softness. A promise. We pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment. The house looked the same as it always had. Stone chimney. Wrap-around porch. Diane's garden bed sleeping under the last of the winter mulch. But something had shifted. The house felt lighter, like it had been holding its breath for months and could finally exhale. "Welcome home," I said to Sophie. "For real this time." She smiled. A real smile. Full and warm. "For real this time," she repeated. That evening, we sat on the porch with coffee. The sunset painted the lake gold and pink. Neither of us talked about Derek. We talked about the garden, about what Sophie might plant in the spring, about whether the dock needed repairs before summer. Simple things. Good things. The kind of things that made a house feel like a home, but I could not leave it there. I could not just let Derek disappear into his punishment without seeing him, without saying what needed to be said. He was still my son. Broken, wrong, destructive, but still mine. I drove to his apartment on a Thursday afternoon. It was a one-bedroom unit, above a dry cleaner on Front Street. The hallway smelled like chemicals and old carpet. I climbed the stairs and knocked. Derek opened the door. He looked like a different person. Thinner, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes. He was wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants. The apartment behind him was nearly empty. A mattress on the floor. A folding chair. A laptop on the kitchen counter. That was it. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside. I walked in and stood in the middle of the bare room. This was what remained. No house, no wife, no career, no reputation. Just 4 walls and a man who had gambled everything on greed and lost. Derek stood by the door, his arms wrapped around himself. He looked small, younger than his 36 years. Like the boy I used to know before something went wrong inside him. "I am sorry," he said. The words came out broken, jagged. "I know that is not enough. I know words do not fix what I did. But I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry." I looked at him for a long time. My son. The boy I raised. The man who tried to take everything from me. Who tried to destroy Sophie. Who lied and forged and manipulated and stole. Who sat in a dark car at 2 in the morning planning how to sell my home out from under me. "I am not ready to forgive you," I said quietly. "Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. What you did, Derek. What you tried to do. It was not just wrong. It was cruel. You tried to take my freedom. You tried to erase Sophie from existence. You were willing to put me in a guardianship, to strip me of my rights, just to get a check. Derek's face crumpled. He pressed his hand over his mouth and nodded. Tears ran down his cheeks. But, I said, and I took a step toward him, you are still my son. I am not going to abandon you. Not now. Not ever. That is not what fathers do. He looked up at me through wet eyes. I do not deserve that. Maybe not, I said. But that is not for you to decide. I put my hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then leaned into it. Like a child. Like a boy who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and finally put it down. When you are ready to be the man I raised, I said, you know where to find me. I left him standing in that empty apartment. At the door, I looked back once. He was still standing there, arms at his sides, tears on his face. But something in his posture had changed. Something had straightened. Just slightly. Just enough. Outside, the snow was melting. Water ran in thin streams along the gutters. Spring was not here yet. But it was coming. 6 months. That is how long it took for Sophie to turn an empty storefront on Main Street into something beautiful. I watched it happen day by day. The scraping of old paint. The sanding of floors. The new display cases arriving on a flatbed truck one Tuesday morning. The hand-painted sign going up above the door, same lettering as the one in Wisconsin. Sophie's Sweet Corner. Traverse City. The town showed up for her. After the trial, after the newspaper article, after everyone learned what Derek had done and what Sophie had survived, the community wrapped around her like a warm coat. People stopped by during construction to offer help. Charlie Dawson from the hardware store donated paint. Bill Henderson spent 3 weekends helping install shelving. Martha Crane, the same woman who had once asked Sophie about a criminal record, brought a casserole on opening day and apologized with tears in her eyes. Opening morning was a Saturday in June. I stood at the back of the shop and watched Sophie cut the ribbon with a pair of kitchen scissors. The line stretched down the sidewalk. By noon, she had sold out of everything. Every muffin, every croissant, every loaf of sourdough. She had to close early and bake through the night to restock for Monday. I helped her set up the interior the week before opening, arranged the tables, hung the lights, and on the wall behind the register, I mounted a framed photograph of Diane, the same one from the living room. Diane at 25, standing in the garden, holding a basket of tomatoes, smiling. Underneath the frame, on a small brass plate, I had engraved, in memory of Diane Morrison, the angel who never stopped loving. Sophie cried when she saw it. Then she straightened the frame, wiped her eyes and said, "She is home now, too." Every week a postcard arrived at the house. No return address. Just a Traverse City postmark and Derek's handwriting on the back. He never asked for anything. Never asked to visit. Never asked for forgiveness. He just wrote. The first one said, Week 4. Started community service at the food bank, sorting cans. It is quiet work. Gives me time to think. The sixth one said, Week 10. Dr. Martinez says, I have been avoiding accountability my whole life. She is probably right. The 12th one said, Week 16. They assigned me to build houses with Habitat for Humanity. I held a hammer for the first time in my life today. My hands are sore, but I built something. A wall. Just one wall. But it is mine. I kept every postcard in a drawer in the kitchen. Sometimes in the evening, after dinner, I would pull them out and read through them, watching my son change in handwritten sentences, watching him become someone I did not recognize yet but wanted to. One night, Sophie found me reading them at the table. She sat down across from me, and I slid the stack toward her. She read them one by one, slowly, her expression unreadable. He is changing, she said finally. Do you believe him? I asked. She thought about it. I think he is trying. Truly trying. Whether it lasts. She shrugged. Time will tell. Do you want to see him? Sophie looked at me. Not yet, she said honestly. But maybe someday. When it feels right. I nodded. That was enough. For now, that was enough. It was a Thursday afternoon in August when Sophie called me from the bakery, her voice shaking. I was in the garden, pulling weeds from around Diane's rose bushes, when the phone rang. Frank, she said, can you come down here? Right now? I drove to Main Street in 10 minutes. Sophie was standing behind the counter holding a piece of paper. A legal document. Her face was flushed. Her eyes were wet. A customer asked me something today, she said as soon as I walked in. She said, is it true your mother owned this building? I thought she was confused. But then I called Margaret, asked her to check the property records. She held up the document. It was a deed, filed 8 years ago. The property at 212 Main Street, Traverse City, Michigan, purchased by Diane Ruth Morrison. Held in trust. Beneficiary. Sophie Morrison. I stared at it. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the counter. She bought this place. Sophie whispered. 8 years ago. She bought this building and put it in my name. In a trust I did not even know existed. Her voice broke. She planned this. Before she was sick. Before she knew she was dying. She found this building. And she bought it for me. Because she knew. Somehow she knew I would come home someday. I thought about Diane. About the bank statements. The monthly transfers. The detective reports. The journal. And now this. A building purchased 8 years ago. Waiting for a daughter who did not even know she was wanted. Diane had not just watched from a distance. She had built a future for Sophie. Brick by brick. Dollar by dollar. Year by year. A future Sophie would only discover after Diane was gone. She always planned ahead. I said, my voice barely holding. That was Diane. She never left anything to chance. Sophie set the deed down on the counter and pressed her palms flat against the surface. Tears fell onto the paper. She bought this place for me, she said again, like she needed to say it out loud to make it real. She always knew I would come home. That evening, I stood on the porch and looked out at the lake. The summer sun was low and golden. Diane's roses were blooming along the fence. The air smelled like warm earth and cut grass, and something sweet drifting up from Sophie's bakery downtown. I closed my eyes and whispered into the evening air. Thank you, Diane. You planned everything. You gave her a home before she even knew she needed one. The wind stirred the roses. Just slightly. Just enough to carry the scent across the porch. And somewhere 50 miles away, in a half-built house with sawdust on the floor, Derek Morrison was driving nails into a frame. His hands were callous now. His suit was gone. He was building something with his own hands for the first time in his life. Not for money. Not for leverage. Just to build. 2 years after Diane's funeral, on a Thursday morning in late November, the bell above Sophie's bakery door chimed at 6:15. The shop was not open yet. The ovens were still warming. Sophie was in the back, braiding dough for the day's challah bread. Flour dusted across her apron, and her hands moving in the steady rhythm she had perfected over 15 years. She wiped her hands and walked to the front. Through the glass door, she could see a figure standing on the sidewalk. Tall. Thin. Hands in the pockets of a worn canvas jacket. No expensive overcoat. No polished shoes. Just a man standing in the cold, his breath visible in the early morning air, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper. Derek. Sophie stood behind the counter for a moment, looking at him through the glass. He did not knock again. He did not try the handle. He just waited. Patient. Still, like he understood that this door would only open if she chose to open it. She chose. The bell chimed as she pushed it open. The cold air rushed in. Derek looked at her. His eyes were different, softer, tired in a way that spoke of hard work rather than calculation. His hands were rough. She could see calluses on his palms, cracked skin on his knuckles. These were not the hands of a man who sat behind a desk. "Sophie," he said. His voice was quiet. "Careful. I know you are not open yet. I can leave. Come in," she said. He stepped inside. The warmth of the bakery wrapped around him. He looked around at the shelves, the display cases, the photographs on the walls. His eyes stopped on Diane's picture behind the register. He stared at it for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he held out the box. "I brought you something." Sophie took it. The brown paper was simple, no ribbon, no bow. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a velvet jewelry case. She opened it. A bracelet, silver chain, with a single charm, a small lily. She recognized it immediately from the photographs. Diane wore this bracelet in nearly every picture from their early marriage. "It was hers," Derek said. "She gave it to me when I was 12, told me to keep it safe. I have had it in a drawer for 24 years. He paused. His voice was thick. "It belongs to you now. It belonged to our mother. Our mother." Sophie looked up at him. He had never said those words before. Not once. In 2 years of postcards, in the courtroom, in every interaction they had ever had, he had never acknowledged Diane as anything other than his mother. His alone. But now, standing in this bakery on a cold November morning, he said it. "Our mother. Thank you," Sophie said softly. She closed the case and held it against her chest. "Sit down. I will make coffee." They sat at the small table by the window. The sky outside was turning from black to gray. Main Street was empty and quiet. Sophie poured 2 cups and slid one across to Derek. He wrapped both hands around it like he needed the warmth. "How are you?" she asked. "Better," he said. "Different." He looked down at his hands. "I finished my community service 3 months ago. 612 hours. Dr. Martinez signed off on my counseling last month, and I have been working with a crew. Construction. Framing houses mostly. You build things now," Sophie said. Derek smiled. It was small, almost shy. "I build things now. Not destroy them." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "I wanted to come sooner. I wanted to apologize, months ago. But my probation officer said I needed to wait until I was ready, until it was real and not just performance." "Is it real?" Sophie asked directly. Derek met her eyes. "Yes. I lost everything, Sophie. My job, my wife, my home, my reputation, my father's trust, and I deserve to lose all of it. Every single piece. Because I earned that loss with my own choices." He set the cup down. "I cannot undo what I did to you. To Dad. But I can be different going forward. That is all I have." Sophie studied him for a long time. Then she nodded slowly. "That is enough for now." They did not talk about the past after that. They talked about the future. About the bakery. About the houses Derek was building. About the winter coming. And whether the lake would freeze early this year. Simple things. Real things. The kind of conversation that 2 people have when they are learning to be in the same room without pain. That afternoon, I stood in the kitchen preparing Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey in the oven. Mashed potatoes on the stove. Cranberry sauce cooling on the counter. The house smelled like everything good, everything right. Sophie arrived first, carrying 2 pies from the bakery. Pumpkin and apple. She set them on the counter and kissed my cheek. "Happy Thanksgiving, Frank." Then Derek. He knocked this time. Waited for me to open the door. When I did, he stood on the porch holding a bottle of cider and looking at me with eyes that asked permission. I pulled him into a hug. He held on longer than I expected, longer than he ever had before. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad," he said into my shoulder. Welcome home, son. We gathered around the table. Me at the head, Sophie on my right, Derek on my left, and in the center, propped against the cranberry sauce, Diane's photograph. The same one from the bakery, the same one from the garden shed, the woman who started all of this with a secret and a prayer. I bowed my head. They followed. Lord, I said, my voice unsteady. Thank you. Thank you for second chances. Thank you for showing us that family is not about perfection. It is about showing up, about choosing each other again and again, even after we have been hurt. I paused. Thank you for Diane, for her love, for her courage, for the secret she kept that brought Sophie home to us. And thank you for bringing Derek back. Not the man he was, but the man he is becoming. I opened my eyes. Sophie was wiping tears with her napkin. Derek was staring at his plate, his shoulders shaking slightly. Amen, I said. Amen. They whispered together. The meal was warm and long. Laughter came easier than I expected. Sophie told stories about bakery disasters. Derek talked about a house he was framing for a young family with 3 kids. I told them about the dock repairs I had been putting off for 2 years. We ate until we were full, and then we ate pie anyway. After the dishes were cleared and the coffee was poured, I looked at my 2 children sitting in the living room and felt something settle in my chest. A completeness I had not felt since Diane was alive. There is one more thing I want to show you both, I said, standing from my chair. They looked at me curiously. Follow me. I led them through the kitchen, out the back door, into the garage, and up the stairs to the door I had broken through 2 years ago. The door to the room where everything began. I made some changes up here, I said, my hand on the doorknob. I think it is time you both saw. The garage smelled like fresh cedar and linseed oil. I had spent 3 months working on it, mostly in the early mornings when the lake was still and the birds had not yet started their arguments. Sophie and Derek followed me up the narrow staircase, their footsteps hesitant, as if they were not sure what waited above. I opened the door. The room was unrecognizable. Where there had been dust and shadows and 37 years of silence, there was now light. I had torn out the old drywall and replaced it with tongue-and-groove pine. The single window facing the lake had been widened into a broad picture frame of glass, and the November sun poured through it like warm honey. Against the far wall stood a long oak table, hand-sanded, with 3 chairs. On the table sat Diane's journal, her photographs, the brass key, and a new leather-bound book with empty pages. Sophie pressed her fingers to her lips. Derek stood very still. I said, "This room held a secret for 37 years. Your mother kept it locked because she was afraid. Afraid that the truth would break us apart. And for a while, it almost did." I looked at Derek. He did not look away, but secrets only have power when they stay in the dark. Once you bring them into the light, they become something else. They become stories. And stories are how we remember the people we love. Sophie walked to the table and touched the journal. She opened it to the first page, the one I had read 2 years ago on a cold night, when my hands would not stop shaking. She smiled. Not a sad smile, a grateful one. "The empty book," she said. "What is it for?" "For us," I told her. "For whatever comes next. Your mother started our family story in secret. I think we should continue it together, in the open, where everyone can read it." Derek stepped forward. He placed his hand on the table, next to the journal, next to his sister's hand. He said, "I want to write something, if that is okay." Sophie nodded. I handed him a pen. He sat down, opened the blank book to the first page, and wrote a single line. Then he set the pen down and stood up. I leaned forward to read it. "I am sorry, Mom. I will do better." 7 words. But they were enough. They were more than enough. We stood there for a long time, the 3 of us, looking out that wide window at the lake. The water was steel gray and cold. But along the shoreline, the last of the autumn leaves clung to their branches, refusing to let go. A pair of loons called to each other somewhere in the distance. The sound carried across the water like a prayer. Sophie said, "She would have loved this room." "She does," I said. And I believed it. We went back downstairs. The turkey was getting cold, and Bill Henderson had already helped himself to seconds of the sweet potato casserole. Martha Crane was telling a story about her cat that had everyone laughing. The house was full of noise and warmth and the smell of cinnamon from Sophie's pies cooling on the counter. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them all. My daughter arranging dessert plates with the precision of a woman who had spent her life making beautiful things out of flour and sugar and hope. My son refilling Bill's glass of cider, laughing at something Bill said. His shoulders relaxed in a way I had not seen since he was a boy. My neighbors, my friends, filling the spaces that grief had emptied. Diane's photograph sat at the center of the table, framed in silver, surrounded by candles and autumn leaves that Sophie had arranged that morning. In the photograph, Diane was 32, standing in front of the lake house on the day we bought it, her hair blowing sideways in the wind. Her smile so wide, you could see it from across the room. She looked like a woman with a secret. She looked like a woman who believed that love, given enough time, could fix anything. I think she was right. 2 years ago, I broke a promise. I took a sledgehammer to a wall that my wife had asked me never to touch. I expected to find something terrible behind it. Something that would destroy what was left of my family. Instead, I found a daughter I never knew I had, a son I thought I had lost, and a love that had been waiting 37 years to come home. If you are listening to this and you have a secret that is eating you alive, I want you to hear me. The truth is not your enemy. Fear is. The people who love you deserve to know who you really are. And if they walk away, at least you will know where you stand. But if they stay, and I believe most of them will stay, you will have something that no amount of money, or silence, or locked doors can give you. You will have a family that chose you with their eyes wide open. That is worth more than any lake house. That is worth more than $2.4 million. That is worth more than 37 years of quiet. Diane knew that. She just ran out of time, but I did not. And neither did Sophie. And neither did Derek. So, if you have a wall in your life that you have been afraid to open, maybe today is the day. Maybe today is the day you pick up the hammer. I promise you, whatever is on the other side, it is better than not knowing. It is always better than not knowing.